Hello everyone, how's it going? Just wait for everyone to come in. Okay, oh, here we go. Right, I've got some people coming in now. All right, excellent. How's everyone doing? I hope everyone is doing okay. We've made it really to what this week. A lot of astrologers, and it's funny because when I was in New York last week, and I'm back now. I've come back. I'm actually at my in-laws' house, and I'm back from what has been a remarkable week. I have to say it's been such a wonderful week, and what I find fascinating about the nature of life and the nature of change, and and again why the unknown is such a beautiful thing. There's always context to all of these cycles. So for example, if you're thinking about Aquarius, thinking about the age of Aquarius, or this 20-year Jupiter-Saturn cycle in Aquarius, which obviously is the start of a much bigger Aquarius cycle. Just refer back to my Jupiter-Saturn talk that I did about that to give you that context. And part of the interpretation of Aquarius is non-attachment. That's what a part of it is to do with. So when we go into these stressful moments, like we've all been through a lot, right? And it's funny when I think about this recording right now, because when I go back to the start of the year and all the random madness and craziness that was going on, and you can see if you look back at all the Instagrams, if you check out Accessible Astrology, you'll see that I've been in so many different places. And it's been a huge theme for me for many, many years now, like where I can never get this consistency of being in one place. It's always like there's always change going on. And a lot of that is to do with, Uranus into Taurus in May of 2018. So we're still in that. And it's interesting, like this week is such a big week in connection to that particular transit, i.e. the nature of change on the earth. So Uranus and Taurus, change on the earth. And, some of the seminars and lectures that I did ages ago was about, the change in the financial system. And it's interesting when we look at the context again about how this emergence is occurring, especially when you consider Ukraine and Russia. Everything that's happened, and that war's been going over a year now, how that has had such a instrumental and huge impact on the world, and the change of this financial order. Obviously, gold now is such a big deal. Even Bitcoin, is such a big deal. And obviously, oil is always connected to war. And again, what happened with the sanctions and all these things that happened last year, and then now the attack on the dollar, the BRICS nations, all of these things that are playing out. And this week in particular is the week that we've all been waiting for as astrologers, really. The reason why we did the launch kit. And we're here now. We're at this pivotal week. Now, the thing is, the problem with astrology, I've always found, is that the ego plays a big part in it. It's why a lot of the time people discredit astrology, and why astrology isn't actually always a good thing. Because our ego, so we start to learn about this stuff, places attachment, like, oh, when that transit happens, this is going to happen. And, oh my God, what's going to happen next, blah, blah, blah. And, all of that is ego. We don't really ever know how it's going to play out or how it's really going to emerge, because there's obviously a lot more to the nature of creation than just astrology. Now, obviously, astrology plays a really unique and pivotal part in it all, because it measures the sky, it interacts with the stars. This is stuff that's been documented for millennia, So that's why it becomes so important. And I was chatting with an astrologer last week. I met an astrologer last week in New York, and hopefully we'll be seeing a bit of her in the future. And it was funny because as astrologers, we were talking about, 2020, for example. And 2020 was such a big deal because it was so bizarre how it played out. So if you were an astrologer, let's say I was practicing astrology 10 years before that date, so going back to 2010, all during that decade, I knew about 2020. And that's because of other astrologers and, people who were older than me, obviously, and who'd obviously looked at these events. So I think as an astrologer, when it actually played out, it was really bizarre, to see how it played out with the astrology, in 2020. And, my mentorship, we looked at all of this, and it validates you, or it makes you feel you're working with something. But then at the same time, some people predicted the pandemic, for example, like Andre Barbeau, he did, he called it like, 20 or whatever years before. So, and a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon, and some people were obviously saying Capricorn aspects. And a lot of those things did play out, like, the things that I said to people as well. So it was really interesting how it all did play out. But again, hindsight is an interesting thing. And then again, interpretation is always skewed to some extent. And there's a certain aspect is, are we creating it, or is it actually happening? Are we adding more emphasis to the potential, which is all part of creation as well? But it's just that we've got to be really careful here not to put our unconditional biases on things. So it's very, very important when we're doing interpretation. And again, you go to various people like Ptolemy and people like that who criticize the nature of interpretation due to the fact that there's a human element, because we're human, so we're all a product of our environment. We're all a product of our conditioning. We're all a product of our bias. All of these things can create a certain degree of like a skewed perception or skewed perspective. So the reason why I say all of this is because we're here now. We're at this week, this very pivotal week. Jupiter is going into Taurus tomorrow, and how that's going to play out this week is really the end of a long and quite difficult couple of months. And it goes further back, like I say, to 2018, when Uranus went into Taurus. And it goes even further back than that, when we're looking at the 2012 cycle, the main prophecies. And then we go even further back to 2000 in terms of the economic cycles. And it can even go further back. So, there's always these contexts. Some people say that this particular cycle at the moment is harking to 1929, the effect of the economic decline and crash that's coming over the next year or so. So all of these things have context. But the beautiful thing about this innocence, let's remember, there's a certain naivety and innocence to, I believe, for why I got into astrology. Because, yes, I'm lucky and I've studied with some of the best in the world now. And, I'm still learning all the time. And I learn so much from the people that I meet on a day-to-day basis as well. And getting the validation from my readings and all these sorts of things, I suppose, give me the juice or the drive to keep going with all of this. Not saying I'm going to be doing this forever. I'm sure I'm not going to be doing this forever. I'm sure I'm probably going to have a certain shelf life in terms of, let's say, astrological readings. And, even now I'm starting to move more into, let's say, integrated astrology. So these are all things we'll talk about once the website comes out and blah, blah, blah. But just to say this, it's like we're at this very pivotal week, right? Jupiter comes into Taurus tomorrow. It's something that, like, for example, the girl I was chatting with last week, the astrologer, we were talking, let's see what happens when Jupiter comes into Taurus. So obviously we're astrologers, we talk about it. And everybody here who's listening now, obviously has some indication of this as well. If you've got the launch kit and if you've been following this for the past, for this year, when I've been doing it on a regular. So again, we've got to do the big so what, to all of that. Well, again, it's very, very important if we look at interpretation to remember there's more to it than just, let's say, reading the astrology, i.e. the intellect. There's also a feeling aspect to it as well. And that's very much to do with our intuition or our right brain. And then we've got to be grounded. We've got to be on the ground, our feet on the grass kind of thing, and be able to perceive and interpret that without obviously being in a very stressed state, because that's not necessarily going to mean we're going to have a really good interpretation. And likewise, being in a very, naive or angelic state, which isn't necessarily grounded, because then we could be very too optimistic and not seeing the dark side of things. I always say be in your heart. That's the real secret to all of this. So, we could have the intellect, either third eye or the left and right, brain here. And then obviously coming through the crown, the information, this is all to do with the head, really. And then obviously, you've got your feet, if you look at your feet, that's the ground, that's the earth sort of stuff in terms of interpretation. And if the feet is on the grass and we're grounded and we're able to process what's happening, relax into that, then we can also feel it better. We're not getting overwhelmed by our emotions, let's say, whatever's going to happen this week, in the news, let's say, and stuff like that. And then if we can get into our heart, we can be present, we can breathe, we can relax. So we're interpreting here, we're feeling because we're grounded, and then we're just relaxing into the breath, i.e. where we fit into this, why we're here, the purpose of it all. If we can relax into that place of being, then we can really use this stuff wisely rather than the ego. That's what I said at the start of this talk. When we get into the ego place of it all, it could become a bit dramatic. It could become hypnotic even. We start to believe everything that people are telling us rather than discerning it. And again, this non-attachment is very important, not being into the idea of prediction, i.e. looking at the outcome. We've always got to have an element of uncertainty when we're interpreting these things. So we're actually allowing the greater, best outcome to occur. Otherwise, we're trying to control it. We're trying to make it fit. We're trying to conjure. And that's the idea of the charlatan. That's the idea of someone who's not authentic, not genuine. So the beauty of this moment for me is the fact that I'm talking about this to you all, and it's very innocent. It's very naive. It's very kind of like, well, I've seen what's happened. It's worked for me. It's worked for others. Now, as a collective, as everyone who's listening right now, as a collective, this is a co-creation. We could be observant now to see what happens this week. And remember, a lot of the time when these planets come into a new sign, it's the build-up that's important. It's the build-up. And then once we go into that new aspect or understanding or interpretation, like Jupiter into Taurus, for example, then maybe we can be present enough or receptive enough to sort of recognize the difference. At the same time, it might take a minute for it to get going as well. So there's always these unknowns, these difficult ways to predict. But again, it's being in that sense of being that makes it relevant, or it makes it entertaining, or it makes it interesting, if nothing else. So it's going to be a really interesting week. And like I say, because Pluto's still in Aquarius, the square to Jupiter in Aquarius, which happens on the 17th, we've got tomorrow Jupiter into Taurus, and then the following day we've got the square. But there's also Mars, because Mars now is moving also into Leo. We're also getting that opposition as well, and how the T-square is working, with regard to the opposition from Mars to Pluto, and then the T-square. So that's happening. I think that's occurring this week, but on the 20th. So we've got a lot going on this week. Now, remember, Mars opposing Pluto is a big deal, in terms of war or in terms of extreme. The difference is the unknown is that Pluto's in Aquarius. This is new. Now, obviously, Mars moves a lot faster than Pluto, but still, it's a big deal. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Ukraine, even though, again, it's very hard to know exactly what's going on. It's very difficult to work it out, There's so much propaganda. There's so much strange stuff going on. And, again, sometimes we've got to turn off the news and not get caught in it, because we can easily get brainwashed right now or corrupted in a lot of ways, because no one really knows what's going on. Now, obviously, for me personally, any war is a bad thing. And everyone has different points of view, and it's not something I really want to talk about right now. All I do know is that we've just got to see how that plays out, I think for the rest of this month. Because Mercury is direct now, even though it's still in its shadow period. So this week's going to be really interesting. And I really believe that once the sun, because obviously the sun's playing a part now as well, when that moves into Gemini. So once we get to the 21st, I really believe we're over what has been a very difficult 3 months and also a really difficult year so far. I personally don't think it's been as bad as the other years that we've had, like 2020 and 2021. But the reason why it's been so difficult for everyone is because we're going through such change at the moment, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. So we've just come through the eclipses as well. And I think everything that's going to happen now until we get to the next eclipses in October, that's when we're really going to see what has really happened now, more. Pluto going into Capricorn, which we'll talk about another time, is going to be also very interesting to see how this, whatever's been going on in the world, obviously we know that we've seen AI massively develop. We've seen also Bitcoin is definitely getting stronger. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Obviously, gold is becoming much more of a relevant thing now as well. So we're getting these commodities and also new technologies, the merger of these things. Inflation's still up, but again, we're all waiting to see what happens with regard to interest rates, because that's the only way that they can control inflation, right? But then a lot of people, there's all the same economic stuff I've been talking about all year. This is the survive and thrive theme still playing out. But once we get past this week, and then we get towards the end of the month, I think once we get to June, as I said last week, that's when we really could start looking at what's going on a bit better, when Pluto goes back into Capricorn, and also when we get to Venus retrograde. That's when we're really going to see the reality of things, not the illusion of things. We're going to see, like I say, with Aquarius, it is about non-attachment, It's a strange time. Let's just family just see that. It's a really weird time because no one really knows exactly, what's going on. And there's so much change, like I say, going on, that we've got to just make sure that we relax. I always say that, relax. And just remember, what's important. You got right. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of weird stuff still happening, unexpected stuff happening, and it's perturbing, isn't it? It makes us feel odd, anxious. It makes us feel out of sorts, and again, what we've got to do is we just got to relax. We're coming out of what has been probably the most difficult period of time in the year astrologically. And like I say, once we get to the end of the month, and then once we get to next month, then we can start interpreting a bit better about what's coming now for the next 3 years, because that's really what's happened this year. We've now moved into the next cycle for the next 3 years, from 2023 to 2027. Obviously 2026 is a huge big deal, but once we get to 2027, that's when we start to see the next phase of all of this. So again, you need to pat yourself on the back. You need to be grateful. That's the key now. You really need to be grateful, because one thing that I've noticed about myself recently is that I've been comparing myself a little bit to others, which is a really dangerous thing to do. When you start to compare yourself, like, as we reach certain ages, we're at stages in life, we reach certain timelines, and we start to look back at our lives maybe sometimes and think what I have and what I don't have. And it's a really bad thing to do, but we're human. That's what happens. We could always look to see where our life is a lot better. Like, for example, if you were living in Ukraine right now, or Syria, and all these various places in the world that are war-torn, it's hard for people to go into that way of thinking, because, we're all products of our environment, and it's easy to be spoilt, entitled, and not really aware. But at the same time, it's not right to invalidate your feelings, to not accept that, you're human, and we are all products of our environment. So we can't start like going, oh, well, at least I'm not in Ukraine, I'm here, and I've got it good, I shouldn't be miserable, or I shouldn't be unhappy. No, everyone is going through the difficulty of what has been over the last 3 years. I mean, it's officially over now, COVID, the pandemic. It's officially been declared that it's over. But yet we are all still psychologically, caught in it. Like, for example, the party I went to last weekend, it was the first time I think most people had been out since the pandemic, where they could relax, enjoy themselves, not talk about it. And, it's funny that I'm still talking about it, but it's just, that's the nature of what we've been through. So we can't underestimate that. We've got to validate our feelings, go into our feelings, but then we've got to move on as well. And that's what, again, this grief period's all been about. We're getting older. People who do get older, they start to see people pass, and this is scary, isn't it? Because it creates your mortality. You all know, many people who follow me, what I've been through, and it's something you have to accept. You have to move forward. In America, it was Mother's Day yesterday, for example. These are things that you have to get through, as you start to appreciate if certain people aren't around. And then, even if it's like, I know people who are closer to my age, who are also maybe not going to make it anymore. The people passing away, and it happens as you get older. And all of that creates a certain degree of sadness, again, it's grief energy. So how do we deal with it? How do we accept these things, which is what grief's all about, going into acceptance. And, again, we've got to be grateful. We've got to be grateful for what we have, grateful for every minute that we have, grateful for all the things that we have. And that's how we find fulfillment, abundance, and grace, really. That's how we do it. So even though everything has been challenging, difficult, money being eroded through inflation, less sales, AI taking over jobs, for example, all these sorts of things, fears and reality checks as well. Like, again, there's been some very weird stuff going on, in terms of how the world has operated over the last 3 years. All sorts of strange stuff going on. And, we're human, we can do so much, but we can always find gratitude. That's what we've got to do at times like this. Got to relax, remember how far we've come, and trust as well that things will always get better, even if things are potentially going to get harder. So nothing's changed in the sense that the world is going through huge change. And as I said before, the old world is ending, the new world is beginning, and it's getting accelerated, and we're going to see more of it over these next 3 years. We can't hide from that. We can't escape from it. But what we can do is we can jump on the exponential wave. We can take a punt. We can do a little bit to know that we're moving in the right direction. Because again, there's been a lot of hopium. There's been a lot of ignorance, willful ignorance. There's been a lot of denial, and all of these things is not going to help when crisis comes. It's not going to be. We're not going to make better decisions, in terms of more difficulty. But again, we can find gratitude. We can remember what we've got, and that's what we've been talking about all year. We've got our food, we've got our family, we've got shelter. Those basic things that we've got, we can really, really be grateful for it. And that helps us get through this changing world. And that's the best that we can do. So with Jupiter coming into Taurus tomorrow, we're going to see more of an acceleration now of whatever's going on, and again, a lot of it depends again on our interpretation, our perception. If we're in ignorance, we're going to get more of that. If we're in willful denial, whatever, we're going to get more of that. At the same time, if we've been persevering, and carrying on, keeping calm and carrying on, and getting to a place where haven't lost our minds, and we haven't made crazy decisions, like, obviously breakups and things like that, could have easily have happened during this time, job problems, all that sort of stuff. So many things could be happening right now. But if we carried on and just done the best that we can and all that, we are going to find ease, as we get towards the end of this month. And then I think next month we can really start assessing where we are, if we've had enough, what we're going to do next, and make better decisions, I think, next month, for sure. So everyone who's listening right now, it's a real blessing, obviously, to talk to you. And it's interesting, again, just to have a heads up about what's potentially coming this week. Again, all these things sometimes play out a little bit longer. But it's Jupiter into Taurus tomorrow. The squares that are going to be occurring with Pluto and the opposition to Mars. And all of this stuff that's going on is going to be very, very interesting this week. It's a big week, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the news. It's not the eclipses, that was what was really difficult just recently. And those eclipses, like I said, are going to be more important in 6 months' time. So I think everything that's going on in these next 6 months is going to be very, very important to see how things play out. Again, financially, I would say, get some gold, definitely get some gold right now. That seems to be the obvious one. And again, my position, no financial advice. I do think Bitcoin is something that people should not ignore. But again, it's very speculative, so you need to do your own research. But other than that, I'm thinking that, it's time now. Again, I keep saying this is from my perspective. It's time for the artists. It's time for the people who are listening to this, who are feeling this, who are conscious enough to make time for this, who are getting something from it. Obviously, I value your time. It's time now to really, really stand up, more than ever. It's time to be authentic and bold and honest, and it's time to call things out as well. Because this next 6 months is going to be very, very crucial. Obviously, we've still got this week to go yet. Because Jupiter's going to be in Taurus seat for the entire year now. And then when it hits Uranus, it's going to be, again, more change, more movement into this new world. And it's up to us, the majority. It's up to the people who are, let's say, innocent, naive, and who are open. There's a far more people who want the greater good. Who don't want war. Who don't want to be controlled as well. I mean, obviously, we all need to have a certain degree of systems and institutions, and I believe in, we need some order in the world. But having said that, there's accountability. That's the real issue. We need to, people, if they're governing us, need to be accountable. And then at the same time, if we're not doing anything about it, then we're not really being responsible for the next generation. We're not really stepping up and saying what needs to be said. We're burying our heads in the sand, or we're being willfully ignorant, or being in denial. And it doesn't mean we have to do anything that is out of our comfort zone to the extent where we feel uncomfortable, even though it's good to stretch yourself a little bit. But it might mean just meeting up with someone and having a conversation with them. It might just mean something as simple as that. I haven't spoken to you for a long time. There's been so much disruption during this last 3 years. Relationships breaking down, people not going out anymore. There's been so much of that. And it creates a lot of isolation, and that creates more, sadly, paranoia, or it can create that. And this Saturn in Pisces can definitely create that. So if we're not getting rid of these boogeymen, or these ghosts, or these dark things, and we're not facing certain things, because again, anyone who understands psychotherapy, if you have things that are hidden, they become monsters. And it might just be, again, a childhood trauma. That's usually what it is. So we've got to face these things, have conversations, and also have some fun. Remember, the summer is here. Like last week, I'm so pleased I went away to New York, because if I hadn't have gone, I wouldn't have had all those amazing experiences I've just had. So yeah, times are harder now. It's more expensive to travel, that's for sure. And, there's no doubt about it. Everything has gone up 30%. No doubt about it. Everything's a lot more expensive now. Same time, though, you've got to have fun. You've got to start enjoying life, because life is short. I think as you get older and you start to see people pass, and you start to see, it's crazy to see it, and it's real. Like I feel personally, I feel so much better now than what I did. Did you feel safe in New York? Right. Well, I think that's really cool. Thank you, Kristen, for saying that. I personally did, but I don't live there. I heard that in Manhattan, like, there's a lot more crime and stuff like that. Even though some people are saying it's a lot of a narrative in the media. But yes, it's true. I mean, I heard about it. I heard New Yorkers talking about it. But I didn't feel that in Brooklyn. But I think maybe Brooklyn's just a bit of a bubble. It just seems very safe to me. But I'm tall, streetwise, so maybe it's different, for, let's say, a woman or someone who, I don't know, I'm not living there. So to answer that question, I felt safe. So that's all I can say. I'm sure if I lived there, I might be different. Yeah, living is different. Crime is up. Yeah, right. It's true. I've heard that. It's true. Again, this is when you've got to distinguish between tourism. Yeah, like for me, I'm effectively went somewhere. It's like I'm a tourist, right? I'm going there, seeing all the best of it. I'm not really engaging in the worst of it. And that's a very luxurious place to be, isn't it? But yes, I have heard crime is up. Some of the people, yeah, we've got to just. Right, the key is right now, in just to answer that question, I believe the next really big aspect, there's a lot happening, by the way, in the next couple of years, but February 2026 is huge, okay? And once we get past that, once we get into 2027 to 2029, let's say, the next phase of this decade, the world could be very different. So it's very important, like, for example, the people I was staying with, in Brooklyn, they've been living there a long time. So, they've got their community, they've got their setup. They probably don't see much else or, venture out too much more. I mean, I can't speak for them. But if you've got a place, let's say, upstate New York, where you've got the countryside and you've got those sort of things, then you're lucky, aren't you? Because you can escape the city. I know that in Manhattan, it's probably worse. I could feel it much more in Manhattan than I could in Brooklyn. But the point is that if you can escape the city, you know, you're not going to feel it as much. But if you're stuck there and you can't get out, then that is really the key for you to start considering, you know, do you want to be in that place any longer? You know, that's really what it comes down to. And I think somebody, you know, who spoke to me as well was saying the same thing, like, I'm glamorizing New York. But, you know, obviously, you know, again, if you do astrocartography, it's magical for me in New York, you see. So whenever I go there, I have magical experiences. It just so happens that that's the case for me. Same if I went to Boston and a few other places around the East. You know, so having been where I live right now, you know, where it's much more countryside and obviously it's safe where I live, you know, when I go out there, you know, I just get super excited, you know, and just magical things happen to me. So there's a personal bias again, what talking about interpretation. You know, right, yeah. So not everyone can handle the city, you know, it's not good for everyone. And like I say, if you're stuck there, then that's when you've got to start thinking, how can I get out there? Not everybody can leave. That's the point. You know, everybody has built up a life there, and that's it. So how do you manage it? How do you deal with your environment? And this is very important. And you need to look at what we did last year for that, the Thrival kit. You need to get onto accessible astrology, and I'm not sure how much that is or if you have it, but you should check it out, because all the kits that we did have been helping get into a place of thrive, you know, getting into an awareness of how to survive, you know, even in the city, you know, getting electromagnetic stress stuff, you know, getting different lighting, making sure that you have like a Berkey filter water, for example, making sure that you have a community, you know, or making sure you can leave when you need to, you know, you've always got to have a plan B as well. So yeah, I don't want to glamorize these things, but again, that's just my excitement, you know, that's just my Jupiterian stuff coming out there. I just personally think it's an incredible place, you know. Okay, so just to sum it all up, this is a really big week, but again, you've got to put it into context of what's been happening over the previous weeks, previous months, and even years. Everyone who's listening right now, what we've got to do is we've got to be grounded this week. We've got to be in gratitude as much as we can. And then we just got to get through this week and see how it plays out. So, for example, if the world goes a bit bananas or whatever, then we've got to kind of get on the phone and talk to people, you know, and, you know, share this video with people, you know, get people to start subscribing, you know, if this plays out and it's helpful to people, because that's the best that we can do. And like I say, the best thing for me is when you people who are listening right now start doing this or doing things like this, because then we're all doing it. We're all bringing light to this equation. We're all sharing what we need to share at a time of crisis or need, especially if this manifests this summer. Like I think July is going to be really, really important when the nodes shift. Eugenia's done a talk about that. I don't know if she's posted it yet, but that's important information in terms of how this next year and a half is going to look. And then likewise, when we get to the eclipses in October, November. So we've got a lot to happen in this next 6 months. I think we're over the worst of it now, except for let's get through this week. Let's see what happens this week. But we've kind of got over the worst of the crisis. Well, not necessarily the crisis, but the big energetics of the year. We kind of moved through the hardest part of the year, basically, which is amazing, you know. So let's just see how it plays out. Again, let's not let our ego add to the problem. This is always the problem with astrology. It's always the problem with knowing this stuff, is that we start to maybe, I don't know, glamorize or make it ego, you know, rather than being in the surrender, non-attachment side of the brain, of the being. Because if we could be in that place, we can observe, and that's really the secret. And then we can start to get clarity better the reason why we're here, you know, why we participate with it. That's when we start to become much more sovereign and much more helpful and beneficial to all of this. Not like, oh, Jupiter and Taurus is coming and this is going to happen, and oh my God, you know, it's very, again, it's sensationalizing all of this. It's not healthy, I believe. it's far better to go, right, okay, I'm aware of this stuff. Let's be discerning. Let's see what happens. Let's not believe me, you know, or somebody else telling you what's going to happen or anything like that. I don't believe in that. I think it's not healthy. I think it's good to be aware for definite. So we'll be aware, you know, we'll watch how it plays out. And if we do see things happen that are quite dramatic this week, then we've got a heads up, and then start sharing this information or start integrating it is the best thing that we can do. I'll start doing Reiki stuff soon and things like that, you know, to help with all of this. And I'm going to be in a better position as well, you know, once we get to the end of this month to assess what's actually going on. Okay, so it's wonderful that we're all connected at this time. It's a blessing. We've always got to remember that there's good and bad in everything, but this technology can be a blessing. The fact that I'm talking to you all, and, you know, it's hard for me to do this, by the way, but I've got to do it, you know. And for all of you guys, you know, who are out there who've got something to offer, connect with us, you know, connect with me, you know, just send me a DM or something like that and say, you know, this is what I want to do. And obviously you can always get a reading or anything like that to help you on your way. I've helped many, many people, you know, to get into their calling or whatever, or uniqueness. But if you don't want to do that, just send me a DM, you know. I will have a community, you know, very, very soon once we get the website up and running. And obviously the Genius community as well, which is very helpful as well. So, accessible astrology. So let's thrive. We're almost at the end of this challenging period of time. There's been so much change. Let's just relax, stay grounded, be in the observer place, be in the place of the heart, be in the center, and again, find gratitude. You know, it's easy to get into the ego and start comparing yourself, like, oh, I haven't got this yet, I haven't had this, and this hasn't happened to me. All of that is ego. But if we're in the heart, if we're in love, and in gratitude, then it's a case of, well, everything is happening exactly as it should, and how can I serve better? That's really what you need to be asking yourself. How can I serve better? You know, and there's always going to be someone who's worse off than you. There's always going to be someone who's having a far worse experience than you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't invalidate your experience, your emotion, and that's when friends, family, the people that really count come in. Get on the phone. Like for me, I've got a great group of friends back home, and it's like, just get on the phone and call them, you know, or whoever it may be. Do things like that, you know, because you don't want to be isolated at times like this. Get over what it is that's making you feel negative, in fear, and try getting to surrender the heart, be in compassion, love, or empathy. But then, once you pass, you know, whatever it's suffering you may be feeling, think about somebody else, you know, think about how you can serve. Think about, it could be the tiniest of thing, you know, you could just get on the phone, speak to your mum and dad, you know, the neighbour, you could knock on the door, say, oh, how are you doing? There's so many places, you know, like homeless shelters and things like that, that people could take it, you know, do something. It'll make you feel better if times are hard right now. Really will. Okay, well, yeah, thanks for all the comments. This is really lovely to hear all this, and just like I say, hold on, just chill, relax. Let's get through this week, and then we're over the worst phase of the year. There's always other phases in the year, but this is the worst. This has been the most hardest, most challenging, the most dramatic, really. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say. If there's any other questions, otherwise I'm going to get off now. And yeah, like, you know, just to say this, like, you know, it's been very frustrating for me, the fact that certain things haven't happened yet. Like, you know, my website hasn't been created yet, and we're still not doing a lot of things that I was hoping I would have done by now. You know, this is very frustrating, but it's nothing compared to, like, you know, losing someone or someone who's died. You know, it really puts things in perspective, you know. Just be patient, be calm, relax. On that note, take care. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week. Stay tuned. DM me, you know, if you want to get in touch, or get a reading. Do whatever it takes, you know, to make yourself feel better. I've got here, did you talk about the new moon? Is it positive part of this crazy week? The new moon is significant. Again, let me just quickly check. 1 second. didn't really talk about it too much. Let me just explain that. Right, so the new moon in Taurus, right? Okay, that's on May the 19th. So thank you, Christine, for I didn't really talk about that. So all that's really doing is the stellium that's occurring right now in Taurus. So that's all that's to do with. So it's just adding more to this theme of Jupiter going into Taurus, which happens tomorrow. Obviously, Uranus in Taurus, that's been there since 2018. The node that is in Taurus, that's been there for a year and a half now. And there's a few other things that's happening now, some of the asteroids as well. So the point is that this very big stellium in Taurus is really just the theme of what's been going on since the last month. So once the sun goes into Gemini, that loosens a little bit of this build-up in Taurus. But obviously, it's what happens tomorrow that's really, really important with Jupiter going into Taurus. The new moon is just exaggerating all of that. So really, when we get into next week, with the sun going into Gemini, we start to see a little bit of ease regarding all this Taurus stuff. But obviously with Jupiter there, it's going to stay in there. And then obviously as it gets closer to Uranus and it works with Uranus, that's really to do with tomorrow. So it's relevant in the sense that it's more a continuation of what's been happening since 2018 and this last month. But tomorrow is really the big deal of that. So yeah, it's relevant to all of this shift again of this Uranus in Taurus, the shift of this move into this new world, and obviously with Pluto in Aquarius still, it's just the same stuff I've been talking about really for the last 3 weeks. So hopefully that helps. This is like the pinnacle, really, in a lot of ways of this Taurian shift, change, the change of the old world into the new world. But again, Pluto is still going to be going back into Capricorn, so we've still got more to go with that. It's in 2 years' time that we're really out of it, and even more so when Uranus goes into Gemini. It's like we're in a completely different world in 2027, completely different world. All right, hope that helps. Thanks, yeah. Okay, great stuff. All right, so with that in mind, take care, love you lots, and speak to you soon.